Whenever we tackle a project, I always go back to what's the audience that we're trying to serve, what's the purpose, and then how are we going to measure it? What was the main goal of the site, and not to distract from all of the additional bells and whistles, which I think is really easy to do.
How did you continue to keep your eye focused on some of these measurable metrics that were so important and not get lost in maybe what some people felt like was a more creative exercise?
So I would say...
On today's episode, we'll be speaking to Kristen Moore. Kristen is Senior Vice President of Marketing for Brixmor. Kristen brings a wealth of experience across commercial real estate, working at a large legacy enterprise organization. And we're really in for a treat today because Kristen is in the midst of a special project. She's actually rebuilding her website. So we're seeing post-click experience at its best. We'll be able to talk to her about the importance of executive buy-in and how much that really helped her to knock down barriers during the course of the project. We'll also speak to her about keeping the customer at the center and how doing that helped the cross-functional team maintain objectivity and keep things moving forward. We'll also talk about the importance of having key people in the project who speak cross-functional languages. How did that level of translation really help build trust and build respect among the different team members? We're happy to be talking to Kristen and get some of her time today. Let's get started. Kristen, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Very excited that we could finally get you on the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I know that the reason it took some time to schedule you is because you've been quite busy this year in particular. Leading marketing, of course, a large organization like yours in and of itself is an extraordinary job. But in particular, you've been managing a pretty complicated website project, really standing up a whole new platform that can be leveraged across the organization to help really drive those leases that are so important to Brixmor and everything you're doing there. And it's excited that we're able to talk to you right at this time because since we focus so much here on the podcast about that post-click experience and the importance of that experience in aligning all those different groups, marketing, product, IT, finance, you're living, breathing proof of literally having just done this. I think you mentioned up to 80 stakeholders that you kind of had to make sure were in alignment to get this project across the finish line. So my first question for you really is about that experience. Like what did that experience teach you about the importance of cross-functional alignment, of getting everyone to the table and getting everyone on the same page?
Yes. So I should point out what we worked on was the leasing section of our website. So actually our website build is a 2-year build. This first section was on just the leasing section. And I was fortunate in that we had about 80 people within the company who worked with us, as well as our external partners. They crossed many different categories: IT, accounting, CAD services, marketing, leasing, and research. And the reason is we weren't just building the web platform, but we were also building an API that pulled together data sources from different parts of our company for public display. We had never done something of this magnitude. So it involved not only data hygiene, but also how does all of this work together? How did you display it? What about different exceptions? So back to your question of what did we learn about cross-functional collaboration, one of them is executive support is key. Like you have to have executive support. The website is a key revenue generator. And so it was a major company objective. And so everybody was aligned behind that. So that really helped a lot. We had a point person in each of those different departments who helped me figure out what needed to be done. So I wasn't having to chase down multiple people. When we encountered an issue, instead of going back and forth with emails, we got everybody on the phone and just hashed it out very quickly. That saved a lot of time. And then a lot of these answers I didn't know, right? I didn't know how we were going to work through certain things. I didn't know what the accounting processes were or how we displayed information. So I had to really trust the team to actually come up with that solution and in a way that we could use it. And then finally, I think at the back end, you have to kind of celebrate the accomplishment. Accounting, this was something very much out of their norm. And so to be part of a a company initiative where it's displayed and it's part of the sales process. It was kind of exciting for them. It's something different for work guys. So we kind of celebrated on the back end and made sure that they were recognized company wide for what they did.
You're really kind of the poster child for the podcast, because so much of why the podcast exists is to be able to help marketing leaders navigate the challenges of the post-click experience, of digital customer experience, and all those pieces and parts that go into that. So to see you having navigated it, or really be in the thick of it, of navigating that effectively, getting over at least this major milestone of getting that back end kind of leasing engine for the web, up and running, and now continuing on that marathon, right? Running to continue to get these other components down and completed. It really kind of shows the importance of being able to have a good working relationship, a good respect for the different marketing leaders. And you touched on all that during your answer. So I really want to kind of pick a little bit of it apart. So one thing you noticed, in fact, the first thing you said that you noticed and learned was the importance of executive buy-in. So how did you find that to be particularly impactful during the course of the project, of making sure the executives were aligned, that they were bought into the project and what you were doing?
So executive support was key. But because it's such a big revenue generator for the company, it was a major goal for the company as a whole. And it actually is part of the chief operating officer's goals. So it's part of the C-suite's goals. And then all of our goals tie into those. So it was part of his goals. As a result, it was shared with the company as a whole. So everybody knew about that. And so it was easy for us to align with that. Uh, Also, he was able to help me if any goals came up or business needs came up that were contrary to that, or kind of swayed off, then he could help us to get that aligned. You can help me work with any roadblocks. He helped me push through roadblocks that we encounter because he understood the project as well as how it had an impact on the broader company. And I think that was really key.
Two things that I really loved about that. So one, and I'll kind of go in reverse order. One, you mentioned that he understood the impact on the company as a whole, right? So he understood this wasn't just about creating some, pretty website or some, nice tool that people could use, that this was going to have a direct impact on the organization and what the organization was trying to do and how it's trying to move forward. And apparently you mentioned so much so, there was actually one of his goals, that was actually something that he was kind of being measured against, right? And that was transparently communicated across the organization and the rest of the C-suite. So I could really imagine how, for lack of a better word, how liberating that must have been to say, hey, I know this is on your roadmap, this is on your goals as a C-suite leader. The rest of the C-suite's aware of it. They all know about it as well. So it can't be ignored. It can't be dismissed. It can't be minimized the way that sometimes kind of websites and marketing projects are, because everyone was already kind of inherently bought into the process and what you were accomplishing right from the beginning. So it allowed for not just a bunch of cheerleaders, but as you mentioned, people who could help kind of block and tackle, knock down obstacles, make things move forward and make things happen. So I can only imagine how much more positive of an experience it turned out being because of all that. So that makes me think then about some of the other role players that kind of come into play. So now you have the actual kind of functional team that has to make this happen. And you mentioned you had different point people from different departments. And one obviously mission critical department in all this is going to be IT, right? I mean, they're going to be very much kind of, if not one of the key players, the key player in actually making this thing work. And one thing I know you mentioned, and I'd love for you to talk about it just a little bit, is you like the fact that the person that you worked with at IT has a bit of a marketing background, that he was actually on the marketing team at one point. So in essence, he spoke marketing and he spoke IT. He spoke two different languages, right? How was that helpful to you as you worked with this cross-functional team?
Actually, I had a couple things in my favor. So first of all, the chief information officer who oversees our IT department, she's highly collaborative. She's also on the executive team on my C-suite. So she knew the importance of it and gave us the resources. So she allocated this per here that you're mentioning, who worked, that was his primary job this year, was to work with me on the website. And so he's the one who built the API. and then helped guide us with the technology team or the outside web developer. He had been with us about 13 years ago. He was on the marketing team, and he has always been our liaison. When he moved over to the IT team, he had been our liaison for our department for 13 years. So he knew what we needed. And then he also knew the data challenges, right? He knew where the data was. He knew the challenges of connecting that data. He knew what we were going to encounter. So sometimes I felt like he had a better vision what we needed to do technically than I did. And so I would often defer to him on how he's explaining to our web agency how we need to get things done. So that was huge, 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 huge. I cannot have done it without him.
To give like a kind of a public service announcement to our listeners who probably at some point in their career have had challenges of making that translation between marketing and what marketing is trying to do into technical language so IT can understand it. And I know, in my career, both on the corporate side and on the agency side, how many times I've run into that issue where those two teams don't communicate well, probably more often than not, don't get along very well because of maybe a history of failed projects. Because marketing said one thing, IT took it another way, then went and spent time and money doing it. They came back to marketing. Marketing said, that's not what we asked for. IT says, it is what you asked for, right? And you get this acrimonious relationship that can happen. And again, it's not because of skills. It's not because of a desire for people to be difficult. It's not because of lack of technology. It's just a communication issue, right? It's just an issue of people not being collaborative, not being able to take the time to communicate and understand the needs of their individual teams and how those align with the organizational needs to be able to move things forward. So when I hear you kind of talk about your partners, again, starting at the C-suite with the CIO, her being engaged and collaborative and involved, and then coming down to your point person who would dedicate to this project, people who could communicate, people who were team oriented, people who wanted, to have an understanding and get along. And what I hear you saying a lot, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like there was a respect among all the different players here, right? The different leaders, the different point people, everyone kind of respected the skill set that was kind of brought to the table. Would you agree with that?
I had to really heavily rely on his expertise and his knowledge. So like I mentioned, sometimes I didn't really see it as he's explaining it, but I had enough trust in him to know that he knew where we needed to get to, and so he would get us there properly. So I really relied on his expertise. The other thing is I had him heavily involved in new channels for a website developer. So he was part of that interview process to make sure that he was going to get along with the web developer so that they were speaking the same language. So he was part of that selection process as well.
Two super critical elements, right? So not just respect, but trust that you had in him. But again, getting him bought in and involved in the process right from the beginning. So he's part of the decision-making process. He feels more invested in what's happening. And of course, inherently, that's going to make him more invested in the outcome of the overall project. So I can really see how that was beneficial. Now, you had a particular challenge too, because on top of what in and of itself was obviously a very large initiative, you guys went through the process of saying, okay, are we going to buy something or are we going to build something? So are we going to go to the market and see what kind of platforms and technology tools are out there and then build our new leasing engine and subsequently website on top of that? Or are we going to say, no, our needs and our requirements are unique enough that it makes more sense for us to build internally something from scratch that exactly fits what it is we're trying to do? And you guys landed on the build side of that decision, which is an extraordinary decision to make, not by any means a wrong one, but a very important one, because that's a massive investment on the part of the company, not just in the short term, in the long term, because now it's something that needs to be maintained. It's something that needs to be iterated on and evolved over time, right? So as you guys kind of went through that process and made that decision, how was it trying to get, again, buy-in to everyone to say, okay, we're going to need to build this? Buying something off the shelf just isn't going to meet our needs.
We didn't want to have to build it, but we had been using a third party platform for over 12 years. And we were just fighting. We did not have transparency into how it is being maintained and further developed. And so we started getting very nervous that we couldn't trust the tool for much longer, given its age. No other vendor was able to replicate it. We asked many, and we just weren't able to find one that could build what we wanted. And so that's what led us to doing our own custom build. We I had to really, because of the size of the investment, I had to get approval from the C-suite. And so that led to us having to develop a business case for why we needed these funds, because I'm competing for the same capital dollars as redevelopment, acquisition, leasing. So we really had to show a return for the money. So fortunately, we had been tracking the historical performance of the website. So I knew how many leads were being generated, the conversion rate, how many leases were being signed from web source deals, and the revenue or rent generated. So I had a 6-year history of that. So I could project what the future performance of it would be. Then I had to we decided to make it a 3-year or 2-year build. So I took the capital and operating costs for a 3-year period, the first year, the 2-year build, and then 1 year of full use. And then I took the operating and the capital expenses for those 3 years and then generated the ROI. So the 3-year ROI ended up being 46%, which is a really strong return. So I was able to show a return for the investment, and that's what led to us being able to debt.
So I imagine that took a lot of time for you, not just to obviously do those calculations to be able to lay out the ROI argument, but probably having to work with finance, right, to make sure that those numbers were validated. That again, that you had executive buy-in across these numbers to say, "Yep, this makes sense. This jives. I see where this is going." Was that a difficult task in terms of maybe communicating things that were a little bit more technical to the finance team to make sure that there was alignment and understanding there of what you were trying to do?
Actually, we didn't involve the finance team because I had been tracking these expenses for years. So I had historical performance to back up and then estimates for the future expenses. So we were able to show just based on what we had been tracking all along. So I do think it's super key that you're tracking your metrics and you're able to interpret those in terms of dollars and cents, because for the C-suite, right, they have to grow the company value. You have to show the how you're growing company value. And so that's why we were able to get it done, because we could talk in the dollars and cents that was important to them.
So it sounds like you were able to, and I want you to correct me if I'm misinterpreting, but it sounds like you were able to kind of get out of just kind of the typical, stereotypical kind of marketing metrics and kind of say, okay, certainly we generated leads, but the leads have to generate leases, right? The leases have to generate ultimately, lifetime value for those clients and how they're contributing. And then that has to roll up to the larger value and revenue that's being generated by the organization's profitability, and then ultimately its valuation. So you were able to take kind of just those marketing metrics, so to speak, that happen kind of a website level, and then connect the dots all the way up to those kind of C-level metrics that really matter at the executive level to say, this is how what we're doing here is going to have an impact up here in a way that's really going to be impactful for the organization as a whole. Is that kind of an accurate summary? Yeah. So I love hearing that, because too oftentimes, marketers have a challenge doing that, making that connection. As you know, sometimes we'll get stuck kind of in those typical marketing metrics and just be talking about maybe leads and maybe leases, right? But not make that full connection. And for such a capital expenditure that we're talking about here, it's just critically important to make that connection. Otherwise, you're not going to win anyone over. right? You're not going to get the investment and support and money you need to be able to kind of to build this, this initiative. So as you kind of went through the process, as you kind of managed it, how did you continue to keep your eye focused on some of these measurable metrics that were so important and not get lost in maybe what some people felt like was a more creative exercise?
Whenever we tackle a project, I always go back to what's the audience that we're trying to serve, what's the purpose, and then how are we going to measure it. So for the website, for this leasing tool in particular, our goal was to lease space. The audience was brokers, in-house real estate reps for national retailers, and small business owners. And so the way we were going to measure that, bottom line, was rent, right? Leases signed that were sourced from the web and the rent that was generated from that. So that became really helpful because what would happen is you have other stakeholders who are using the website. And if they want something that was contrary to those goals, I'd have to kind of pull back and go, no, we're not going to add that. So an example would be our former site had 3 contacts listed on it for each one of our properties. It had a leasing agent, a short-term leasing agent, and a property manager. Well, the internal stakeholders, employees, loved using that because if they needed to find a property manager, they would go to the page and that's how they would find it. Well, when we did research of our audience, small business owners said that's very confusing to us. We don't want 3 contacts. We want 1 contact that we should contact. So we simplified the page and we did 2, and we gave a description of why you would contact each of these. So the property manager did it. And so I got questioned about that. And I'm like, yes, but that's not what our audience wanted. So it really helped to keep us focused on what was the main goal of the site and not to distract from all of the additional bells and whistles, which I think is really easy to do, is to keep adding on things and lose focus of what the customer said they wanted.
How often did you find yourself, and I mean, of course, this is just not necessarily an exact number or anything, but how often do you find yourself referencing the customer research that you did, kind of the background research, and using that constantly to keep things focused, to keep things aligned and not kind of get distracted and go off on tangents?
Yes, because I think, as marketers, we understand, right? It's about what the customer wants and delivering what what they're looking for. And I don't think a lot of people don't realize how much strategy goes into what you're working on and how you get to that end goal. They just see a really creative, good-looking website or a really cool brochure or campaign, and they don't really realize how much strategy is in there, how you have to keep the message simple, how you have to keep it targeted, how it has to address what they're looking for. So we often have to go back to referencing survey results, even their own. We'll have leasing agents. We did surveys with all of our leasing team about what they wanted. And then down the road, they're like, well, we want this. I'm like, actually, you said you wanted this. And we'll have to go back. So, yes, we often have to go back to it.
And it's interesting. I'm glad you mentioned that because obviously, with a project of this scope and scale, right, you have multiple customers here, right? So at the core, obviously, is the end customer, the potential client that you have that you want to lease one of the spaces in one of your shopping centers. But as you just alluded to, there's a number of internal customers here as well that and their input and opinion matters too. So it sounds like you researched both audiences, right? Both the external kind of small business owner customer that comes to Brixmor and says, I want to lease this space. But it sounds like too, correct me if I'm wrong, you also took some time to get input and research and survey data from the internal customers too, and how this is affecting their business, their goals, their day-to-day operations.
Yes. So for the leasing site, we actually had 2 very diverse customers. We had the small business owners, as I mentioned, but we also had those brokers and in-house real estate reps who are very sophisticated in their real estate process. So that was its own challenge because one is very sophisticated and wants information very quickly. The other one, you have to kind of educate as you're going along on what they're looking, on what they need and information they need to make a decision. So, but then we also have our internal stakeholders, which are the leasing agents who serve those customers and are using this tool every day to serve those customers. And so it was marrying what both of those groups wanted in a way that wasn't distracting. And so, yeah, you had to be really careful about that.
Having gone through this entire exercise, and again, I know you're still kind of in the middle of it, but you've reached a major milestone, and I know that's a huge win. It sounds like arguably the most complicated component of it is the piece that you kind of got the win and kind of got behind you as you move forward with the rest of the effort. Um, Now having the benefit of hindsight, looking back, seeing everything you did in terms of research, stakeholders, ROI analyses, working with the external agencies, right, getting the right point people and so forth. If you had to give advice to someone in your shoes, right? So, um, marketing leader, legacy enterprise organization, an organization that's been around for a little bit while, more established, maybe some, you know, um, large departments to be able to coordinate, maybe some older systems to have to navigate and so forth. And they're looking to say, okay, we're at the point where Brixmor is. We're going to have to make a decision to invest in our digital future and figure out what direction we're going to go because we can't just kind of keep doing things the way that we have been. The future's moving ahead too fast. We need to kind of keep up, right? And establish a new infrastructure, so to speak. What are kind of the maybe 1 to 3 things that you would give as advice, or maybe therapy, to those marketing leaders to kind of say, hey, these are the things you really need to keep as kind of your North Star or your North Stars if you're going to kind of go on this endeavor?
I would say the consumer research on the front end. We had really surveyed our customers. We knew what they needed, so that kept us focused on what needed to be done. I would say when you're estimating the project, add probably 20% to your budget. But and time, also time.
Well, those are two, critical pieces of advice, right? The importance of keeping the customer at the center. It's a theme that we've heard many times in the pod across multiple industries, right? How these successful organizations are able to keep themselves customer centric and maintain that focus, and that in itself ends up being a North Star for the team because when things come up, to your point, it's easy to get subjective about things and get distracted. But then, it's like, well, what did the customer want? What did the customer say? Well, it's like, well, what's your opinion? That sounds nice and it sounds good, and I appreciate that's your thought and your experience, but that's not what the customer wanted. So if that's what we're about here, and that's what we feel is going to deliver ultimately the kind of results we want, then that's what we kind of have to default to and kind of push us back to the center. So I think that's super important, and I love emphasizing that. And then the other thing you mentioned, the importance of contingency, because with a project that large, that much scale, that many people involved, the number of stakeholders, the number of resources involved, things are going to happen by no one's fault, right? Like no one's trying to cause it or anything, or no one's doing a bad job per se. It's just things are going to happen once you add complexity to any situation. So the ability to plan for those complexities by having that contingency built in, it sounds like that really helped you guys kind of stay on track within certain parameters, right, as it were, and be able to keep moving forward and not kind of get bogged down and kind of hit a wall that kind of stalled the project overall, that got you to the milestone where you're at.
Yeah, I got that advice from our head of IT, right? Because she had done so many of these types of projects. She knew. So that was really helpful advice.
We're so happy that we were able to get you on because this has been a little bit of a case study in what it is to actually engage in building an impactful post-click experience. Sometimes we talk about this kind of in theory or maybe just in trying to do day-to-day work. But here you had this massive project that needed to happen that really displays the complexities and technicalities around it, but how it can be successfully accomplished, how marketing leaders can take that lead and be able to do that with the proper respect, the proper trust, the proper level of collaboration around the teams and around the goals of the organization, and then lead it to a successful outcome. And certainly, I know you'll continue to do that as you move forward. Kristen, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for buying out time. I know you're still in the middle of it, but we appreciate you being able to talk to us for just a few minutes and share your experience.
Hey, Brixmor.